Karen sat in her home office, surrounded by stacks of printed emails, neighborhood violation reports, and 3 different versions of the HOA bylaws. Her hair, now dry but still bearing the frizzy aftermath of yesterday's sprinkler incident, was pulled back in a severe bun. She'd spent 14 hours researching every possible angle of attack. "Margaret," she said into her new phone, addressing the HOA president with the tone of a general briefing troops. "I need an emergency board meeting. The Henderson situation has escalated beyond acceptable parameters." Margaret Chen. Yes, the same Mrs. Chen who'd recorded Karen's humiliation, sighed audibly. "Karen, we discussed this. The gravel is within acceptable color variations. The pool removal was properly permitted. There's nothing." "Nothing?" Karen's voice hit a pitch that made her coffee mug rattle. "Margaret, are you aware that Henderson has been operating an unlicensed water feature? That his sprinkler system creates standing water puddles that violate drainage ordinances? That his decorative stones could be considered a slip hazard under Liability Statute 12.4. The silence stretched long enough for Karen to hear Margaret's grandfather clock chiming in the background. "Karen, you're reaching. These violations are creative interpretations at best." Creative. Karen stood so quickly her chair rolled backward and slammed into her filing cabinet. "Margaret, I've been the compliance officer for this community for 8 years. 8 years. I've maintained property values, preserved aesthetic standards, and kept this neighborhood from becoming another strip mall wasteland. And now you're questioning my judgment." What Margaret didn't know was that Karen had already implemented phase 2 of her plan. While researching Henderson's violations, she'd discovered something delicious. The Chen's backyard shed was exactly 4 inches too close to their property line. The Johnsons' fence was 6 inches too tall. Even President Margaret's own rose garden extended 2 feet beyond the approved landscaping boundary. "I'll be filing formal complaints against 17 properties by end of business today," Karen announced, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "Starting with yours." "Mine?" Margaret's composure cracked. "Karen, what are you talking about? Your roses, Margaret. Beautiful as they are, they're in violation of setback requirements. I have measurements, photographs, and witness statements. Unless you'd like to explain to the neighborhood why the HOA president gets special treatment." The power shift was immediate and intoxicating. Karen could practically hear Margaret's panic through the phone. "This is extortion," Margaret said quietly. "This is enforcement," Karen corrected. "Something this board has apparently forgotten how to do." By evening, Karen's phone was ringing nonstop. First came the angry calls from neighbors who'd received violation notices. Then the pleading calls from board members who'd suddenly discovered their own properties weren't quite as compliant as they'd thought. Finally, the call she'd been waiting for, Henderson himself. "Karen, we need to talk." His voice was tired but firm. "This has gone far enough." "Has it?" Karen smiled at her reflection in her office window. "Because from where I'm sitting, Tom, this is just getting started." But as she hung up, Karen caught sight of something that made her stomach drop. A black sedan with government plates was parked across from Henderson's house. 2 men in suits were taking photographs of the neighborhood, including her own property. Her hands shook as she reached for her binoculars. One of the men was holding what looked like an official document. The other was pointing directly at her house. Karen Whitmore's perfectly manicured finger trembled as she pointed across the street at the Hendersons' backyard. "That is not regulation gravel," she shrieked into her phone, her voice carrying 3 octaves higher than usual. The HOA emergency hotline operator had hung up on her twice already. But Karen's determination was legendary in Willowbrook Estates. What had started as a routine Tuesday morning property inspection had quickly devolved into what Karen would later describe as an assault on community standards. The Hendersons had removed their above-ground pool, fine, within their rights, but they'd filled the space with decorative white rocks instead of the HOA-approved Riverstone blend, specified in subsection 4.7b of the community guidelines. "Ma'am, you've called 17 times today," the weary voice on the other end began. 18, Karen corrected, adjusting her binoculars. and I'll call 18 more times if necessary. Do you see what I'm dealing with here? The second shocking moment came when Mr. Henderson emerged from his house wearing nothing but flip-flops and swim trunks, carrying a garden hose. Karen's jaw dropped as she watched him spray down his illegal gravel, creating what could only be described as a backyard water feature. Her blood pressure monitor, a recent gift from her long-suffering husband, began beeping frantically on her wrist. He's creating an unauthorized water element, she gasped into the phone. Section 8.2c clearly states. The line went dead again. But the third and most catastrophic moment occurred when Karen marched across the street to confront Henderson directly, her laminated copy of the HOA handbook clutched like a shield. She'd made it halfway across his lawn where the sprinkler system activated. The industrial-grade sprinklers, clearly installed to spite her, she was certain, drenched her cream-colored blazer and helmet-like hairdo. Worse yet, her phone, her precious lifeline to HOA enforcement, slipped from her wet fingers and shattered on the decorative gravel she'd been protesting. Hendeas Alman, she bellowed, looking like a drowned poodle. This is intentional harassment. Tom Henderson, a retired firefighter with the patience of a saint, turned off his hose and smiled. Actually, Karen, it's Tuesday, sprinkler day, same as it's been for the past 6 years. As Karen stood there, dripping and furious, she noticed something that made her heart stop. The Johnsons next door were watching from their window, phones out, recording. Mrs. Chen from across the street had emerged with her camera. Even old Mr. Patterson had wheeled his chair onto his porch to witness the spectacle. They were all against her, every single one of them. Karen's eyes narrowed as she wrung out her blazer. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. If the HOA wouldn't listen to reason, she'd make them listen to consequences. She had connections, resources, and most importantly, she had time. The war for Willowbrook Estates had officially begun. Karen's morning coffee had gone cold an hour ago, but she couldn't tear herself away from her surveillance post at the living room window. The government sedan had returned, and this time it was joined by a white van marked City Planning Department. Her stomach churned as she watched officials measure, photograph, and document everything from property lines to mailbox heights. "What the hell have you done, Henderson?" she muttered, adjusting her binoculars for the dozenth time. The doorbell's chime made her jump. Through the peephole, she saw a woman in a navy blazer holding an official clipboard, never a good sign in Karen's experience. Taking a deep breath and smoothing her already perfect hair, Karen opened the door with her most professional smile. "Mrs. Whitmore, I'm Inspector Patricia Walsh, City Code Enforcement. We need to discuss some irregularities with your property." Karen's smile faltered. "Irregularities? I think there's been some mistake. My property is in perfect compliance with all." "Ma'am, may I come in? We have quite a bit to cover." The next 20 minutes were the longest of Karen's life. Inspector Walsh methodically went through violation after violation. Karen's home office had been converted without proper permits. Her prize-winning garden shed exceeded height restrictions. The decorative fence she'd installed to maintain privacy standards was built on city easement property. Worst of all, her extensive security camera system, the very tools she'd used to document her neighbors' violations, had been recording public spaces without proper authorization. "But I'm the HOA compliance officer," Karen protested weakly. These installations were necessary for community oversight. According to city records, Mrs. Whitmore, you haven't held any official position with the registered HOA for over 3 years. Your authority appears to be self-appointed. The words hit Karen like a physical blow. "That's impossible. I receive all the correspondence. I file all the reports." "Yes, we've seen your reports. Over 400 complaints filed in the past 2 years alone. Most of them regarding violations that don't actually exist under current city or HOA codes." Inspector Walsh's expression softened slightly. "Mrs. Whitmore, when was the last time you actually attended an HOA board meeting?" Karen's mouth opened and closed silently. She couldn't remember. After her initial election 8 years ago, she'd assumed her authority was permanent. The monthly reports she'd been filing, the violation notices she'd been issuing, Had anyone actually been reading them? There's more, Walsh continued gently. Several of your neighbors have filed harassment complaints. The city has received over 50 calls about your enthusiastic enforcement methods. We're required to investigate. As if summoned by her humiliation, Karen's phone began buzzing with text messages. The first was from Margaret Chen. Emergency board meeting tonight. Your presence is not requested. The second, from Tom Henderson. Karen, the cameras you installed to watch us were actually watching city property. Thought you should know before the news crews arrive. News crews? Karen rushed to her window. Sure enough, a local news van was pulling up to Henderson's house. A reporter and cameraman were already setting up, and Henderson was walking out to meet them with what looked like a thick folder of documents. No, no, no. Karen pressed her face against the glass. This couldn't be happening. She was the guardian of community standards, the protector of property values. She was the hero of the story. Mrs. Whitmore, Inspector Walsh called from behind her. We're going to need you to attend a hearing next Friday. You'll want to bring legal representation. As the inspector left, Karen sank into her imported Italian leather chair. Another unpermitted addition, she realized with growing horror. Through her window, she could see neighbors emerging from their houses, drawn by the commotion. Some were pointing at her house. Others were shaking hands with the reporter. But it was Henderson's expression that made her blood run cold. He wasn't angry or vindictive. He looked almost sad, like he pitied her. The phone rang again. This time it was her husband calling from his business trip. Karen, honey, I just saw the news online. There's a story about our neighborhood, and your picture is. She hung up without answering. Outside, the crowd was growing larger, and Henderson was handing out what looked like copies of documents to anyone who wanted them. Karen realized with crystalline clarity that everything she'd worked for, everything she'd built, was crumbling around her. But as she sat there in her perfect house in her perfect neighborhood, watching her perfect world collapse, one thought kept echoing in her mind. This wasn't over. Not yet.